من الأصحاب هم صفوة رفعوا بصحبة أحمد وبذاك قد خصوا من الوهاب. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So some of the things that they mentioned within the debate because of the limited time. So I will mention some of the virtues of Sayyidina Aisha anha. And before I do so, I'll attach the link where you can find the virtues of Sayyidina Aisha anha. So yeah, the link is attached right now. You'll find all the references there. So I'm going to start from point 9. So from the proofs of the Sunnah. So we find Aisha anha, she actually shares one of the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she shares this prophecy, but let's see what she does with the prophecy. So Aisha anha reported, some of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, which of us will be the quickest to meet you? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the one with the longest hand. They measured their hands with the sticks, and Sauda had the longest of them, yet Zainab was the first to die. Then we knew that the length of her hand meant her charity. She was the quickest to meet him, and she loved to give charity. So what we find from this narration, Bukhari 1420, that initially the prophecy, they didn't understand what's the prophecy. And because they understood that the longest of hand was, they measured the hands and they understood it meant something else. But then Aisha anha, she knew the Prophet Muhammad is the truthful prophet. And so she understood the longest in hand meant charity. So it's a metaphor for charity. That's how she understood it. So only reason she would understand this in this way, and and allowing the prophecy to, try to comprehend the prophecy, try to understand it, is if she actually believes in the Prophet. Otherwise, she would have said, "Oh no, this is a false prophecy." So this is a proof that she believed in the prophecy to such an extent that she was willing to understand it instead of calling it a false prophecy. So point 9, I'm on point 9 now on the link. We find Aisha anha, she used to cook for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She used to prepare drinks for him. She would also wash the clothes of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She used to comb and oil his hair. She also used to bathe together with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we have references from Bukhari, Abu Dawood, and Ibn Majah. And you can imagine the lofty status or place she must have reached by doing this in the heart of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We also have another narration where Sayyidina Sauda anha, she feared that the Prophet Muhammad might divorce her. So she approached him and asked him to keep her as a wife so that she may be raised with him as his wife on the day of Qiyamah. As far as her turn was concerned, she gifted it to Sayyidina Aisha anha. So her turn, she actually gifted it to Aisha anha, knowing that this would earn her the pleasure of the Prophet. So she feared that the Prophet would divorce her, and in return of that, she wanted the Prophet not to divorce her, so she gifted her turn to Aisha anha. You can find this in Bukhari 2593, Abu Dawood 2135, and Mishkat al-Masabih 3237. So even the people knew that the Prophet Muhammad loved her more than anyone, other wives and whatnot, and she was the favorite, and therefore even Sauda anha, she gifted her day to Aisha anha. So yeah, let's go to the next reference. We find the gifts of people were given during Aisha anha turn by the general public because they knew the Prophet Muhammad loves her. All the wives acknowledge this special virtue. So you can see Sahih Muslim 2441, and Salama also narrates this, another wife of the Prophet. In Nasa'i 3950, Ibn Abbas who also attested that Aisha anha is loved by the Prophet in Bukhari 5218. So even the general public, they knew that this day the Prophet will be with Aisha, and they wanted the Prophet to be pleased with them, so they gave gifts during this particular day. So they knew the Prophet loved her, and they gave gifts during this day. And yeah, so this shows the special virtues of Sayyidina Aisha anha, where even the general public knew this at the time. So we have another narration where, in a nutshell, what happened in this incident was the wives got together and they sent Fatima to the Prophet, and they told her to say, your wives and he says so, and then basically have be equitable with the other wives, be equitable with the other wives. And so she entered. So we find Fatima entering upon Prophet. So in a nutshell, let me just rephrase that. The wives got together. They told Fatima to go and tell the Prophet to be equitable between the wives. And so when Fatima anha, she went to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and she said to be equitable. Basically, what happened was the gifts used to be given, like as I just mentioned, that the gifts used to be given on that day. And when the gifts were given, the other wives, kind of complained about this, and they sent Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, to intercede regarding this particular thing. So when they went, when Fatima anha went, the Prophet said to her, Fatima said, your wives have sent me and they're urging you to be equitable with regard to the matter of the daughter of Abu Quhafa. The Prophet said to her, do you love me? So he said this to Fatima, do you love me? She said yes. He said, then love her. So the Prophet is telling Fatima anha to love Aisha. So she went back to them and told them what he said. They said to her, you did not do anything. Go back to him. So the wife said, go back to him. You haven't solved anything yet. She said, by Allah, I will never go back. I will never go back about her again. She was truly the daughter of the Messenger of Allah, as the narrator says. And this, you can find this in Nasa'i 3946. In another narration, we find that Aisha anha, she says, Zainab swooped me on me and abused me, and I started watching the Prophet to see if he would give permission to respond to her. She insulted me. I started to think that he would not approve if I responded to her, so I insulted her and as soon as silenced her. Then the Prophet said to her, she is the daughter of Abu Bakr. Now this is in Adab, I believe in Adab al-Mufrad 559. Now, what we notice from this incident is that she actually looked for the approval of the Prophet Muhammad. She cared about his feelings, and she, as the narration says, she looked to him for approval. The Prophet didn't scold his wife due to the rivalry, so we see here he didn't tell them off in a very severe way, because this is natural. This rivalry is natural between the wives. The Prophet ﷺ instructed Fatima to love Aisha, so as we learned already, so it's an obligation to love Aisha and her. Otherwise, this instruction would not have taken place. Okay, so let's go to the next point, other virtues. We find narrated Salama anha, the Prophet said, do not bother me, and about Aisha. And if you go to the Arabic of it, let's see what word is used. Because if I remember correctly, he actually used the word was harm. Yep, it says لا تؤذيني في عائشة فإنه لم ينزل علي الوحي وأنا في لحافي. So, and then it continues. So, in a nutshell, we find the same wordings of harm here. تؤذيني. So, do not harm me regarding Aisha. And the narrator is Salama. So, we can clearly see the other wives knew this, that they're not supposed to harm Aisha, and her rank is on a different level. And this is Nasa'i 3950. We also find there was a person that came and cursed the Prophet Muhammad. And then in return, Aisha anha, she cursed the people who were cursing the Prophet. This has been narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah in Sahih Muslim 2166. We also find this in Bukhari 6030. We also find this in the Shia tradition, where cursing the Prophet, someone was cursing the Prophet, and then Aisha anha got angry and then she cursed that person. So we see this from the Shia narration. Let's see what I'll tell you the reference exactly from the Shia narration. This is in Al-Kafi, volume 2, and it's been graded Hassan by Majlisi in Mirqatul Uqul, volume 2, page 545. So even from that narrations, we can see that the Prophet loved Aisha loved the Prophet to such a degree she got angry on his behalf. She also insulted the person that was insulting her, and we find this in their narrations, in our narrations too. So in summary, so far, we have learned that it was known to all Muslims that Sayyidina Aisha was a favorite of the Prophet ﷺ. We also know that the wives of the Prophet ﷺ had such a good relationship with Fatima anha, that she interceded on their behalf. We also learned that the Prophet ﷺ instructed the beloved daughter and the Queen of Jannat, Fatima anha, to love Aisha. So he instructed his daughter to love Aisha. So it's even more of an obligation for us to love Sayyidina Aisha anha. Revelation descended upon the Prophet whilst he was in her bed, Aisha anha's bed. The Prophet loved her, and this was on account of her virtues. The Prophet did not scold his wives for their rivalry against him. So hopefully that's clear in this regard. So I'm just going to mention a few more points. I think we're on point 15 on the link. You'll find point 15 on the link on Proofs for the Sunnah, if anyone wants to follow along. So it says the Prophet has great consideration for Sayyidina Aisha anha, where to such an extent she lost something in a journey, he stopped the whole caravan until Fajr. So he had such love for her and consideration that he stopped the caravan because she lost her necklace. And this you can find in Bukhari 5882 and Nasa'i 314. This it's been narrated by Ammar as well. A similar story about the caravan, actually where she lost the necklace. It's also in Abu Dawud 320, Bukhari 336. All of them are reliable hadith. And interesting enough, this is such a virtue. Let's read this story, right? It's such a virtue that the whole ummah is thankful to Aisha anha for this. Why? Because let's read the story. It says, during one of the journeys in which Aisha anha accompanied the Prophet ﷺ, she lost her necklace. The Prophet ﷺ, as well as the rest of the travelers, stopped and searched for it. This resulted in a Muslim being without water. So some of the companions complained regarding this to Abu Bakr anhu, who in turn scolded Sayyidina Aisha. So Abu Bakr, her father, he told Aisha anha off for this. But however, while later, great joy was experienced as the reverse of the Tayammum was revealed. So the Tayammum verse was actually revealed in conjunction with what happened with Aisha anha. So this is Sabab Nuzul based on what happened with Aisha anha. And so therefore, this is a virtue where what happened then was Sayyidina Usayd ibn Hudayf said to Aisha anha, this is not the first of your blessings or family of Abu Bakr. So we also have another narration in Bukhari where it has an addition where it says, may Allah grant you the best of rewards by Allah, no matter which you dislike ever came upon you, except that Allah brought some goodness out of it. So what we find here is that the virtue of Sayyidina Aisha anha is such that due to this event that happened, where she lost her necklace, the verses the Tayammum came down. And then people thanked her for this virtue, for this incident to come about. And I've already mentioned the references. Another virtue of Sayyidina Aisha anha we find in Bukhari 6845. She didn't want to wake the Prophet Muhammad. She had consideration for him. To such an extent, she didn't want to wake him up. So we see that all of these evidences thus far proves that she was a believer. She had care for the Prophet, and she loved the Prophet. And it's unimaginable that people can claim, therefore, she was unbeliever or she was, she had hypocrisy after all the virtues that have been mentioned thus far. So we're on point 17 now. So on point 17, proofs from the Sunnah, I'm going to mention another virtue of Sayyidina Aisha anha. We find that when the slander happened against her during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, the Prophet said, Wallahi, he said, by the oath of Allah, I do not know except virtue regarding my family. This in Bukhari 2637. So we find that when this happened, he's saying that I only know good about my family. And he actually included her in her family. So the Ahl. So when they said, normally they said that Aisha Anha is not part of the Ahl Bayt, we actually find she is, because the Prophet said it himself. He said in Bukhari 2637, he says, my family, Ahli. We also find deep love for Aisha Anha. Aisha says the Prophet would give me a bone which I would clean. Thereafter, he would take it and place his mouth on the exact spot where I placed my mouth. This is Nasai 380 and Sahih Muslim 300. So they used to eat from the same spot, and this was our love. And we find another verse of Sayyidina Aisha Anha where she used harsh words against those who inconvenienced the Prophet Muhammad. So she said, may Allah put you through something that does not please you. You neither managed to do what you were told, nor did you stop inconveniencing the Prophet. She says this in Bukhari 4263. So someone who was inconveniencing the Prophet, she got angry, or she used harsh words against that person. Now, if she didn't love the Prophet, she had no care for the Prophet, if she was pretending, why would she get angry? Why would she care about the people who are inconveniencing the Prophet? So all of these evidences are going against such people who try to make these claims. We find another narration the Prophet ﷺ would kiss his wives, including Aisha Anha, Bukhari 1927. We also find another narration when the wives wanted more allowance. They wanted more allowance, like they wanted more money and stuff. The Prophet ﷺ recited a verse in Surah Ahzab, verse 28. He recited, O Nabi, say to your wives, if you should desire the worldly life and its adornments, then come, I will provide for you and give you a gracious release. But if you should desire Allah and His Messenger and the abode of the hereafter, then indeed Allah has prepared for the doers of good among you a great reward. So here, due to the fact they wanted more allowance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a verse saying that if you want the allowance, then you can go on your own ways, essentially. But if you want the Allah and His Messenger, then and the hereafter, then He has prepared the reward. So when this verse was revealed, whether they want to stay with the Prophet or whether they want to not stay with the Prophet, this is a decision that was made for them. It was a decision that was offered to them. When the Prophet told her, he came to Aisha Anha. She was the first person the Prophet came to, and he said to her, "Do not." He said to her, "You do not have to rush until you consult your parents." So he said this to her. Aisha Anha replied, "Should I consult my parents regarding this?" She said, I desire Allah, His Messenger, and the board of the hereafter. And this is in Nasa'i 3440. So when this option was given, you can either divorce, choose to leave the Prophet, or you choose Allah and His Messenger. And what we find here, she chooses Allah and His Messenger and the board of the hereafter. This is also found in the Shia traditions as well, where actually, let me give you the reference. I'll tell you where you find this in the Shia tradition, where she chose Allah and His Messenger. Their own imams, infallible imams, said that she chose Allah and His Messenger. This you can find in Mirqatul Uqul, where this narration can be found. And let me get the exact place. This is so this is Mirqat al-Uqul by Majlisi in volume 21 and page 233. You can find this there. So yeah, that's the reference for that, where even from the Shia Imams that she chose Allah and His Messenger. Now let's see the next virtues of Sayyidina Aisha Anha. And just so you're aware, right? After this option that was given to Sayyidina Aisha Anha, either you stay with the Prophet or you can basically leave him. After this, you gotta remember that the implication of her staying with the Prophet would mean that she would never marry again. And she was about 17 years old. So she sacrificed her whole life for this. She chose an option that was be sacrificing her whole life, especially when she knows the Prophet is at a very elderly age, and this was a few years before he passed away. I believe this option was given maybe 1 year or less than that, actually, so very close to his death. So we also find in another narration the Prophet said, the superiority of Aisha over all women is like the superiority of tharid over all dishes. Now this being narrated by Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu in Bukhari 5428. It's also been narrated by Abu Musa al-Ashari in Nasa'i 3947. So we find the Prophet saying that she's superior over all women. Now, how can then someone say that she's not? So it's crazy. It's crazy. And especially when they try to approach our text to suggest this. It's blatant hypocrisy and twisting of the text. We find another narration. So these are some of the texts I didn't cover during the debate just because of the lack of time. But I want to cover them today. So I want to go through them. So the replays are there. So if anyone wants to check them out, they can definitely check it out. So I'm on point 23 from the link I've attached. And so it says, angel greeted Sayyidina Aisha anha. The Prophet said, "Oh Aisha, this is Jibrail. He is greeting you." Bukhari 3217. We find another narration from the Prophet he had a Persian neighbor who excelled at preparing gravy. Once he prepared some for the Prophet and then went to him to call him. The Prophet asked Sayyidina Aisha anha, and so basically this guy, he invited the Prophet for a meal, and then the Prophet asked regarding Aisha, like, what about her? And her basically. And he replied, the person said no. Thereupon the Prophet rejected the invitation. This happened the second time, and then third occasion as well. The man replied yes, basically her as well. So she's invited as well. Then the Prophet and Aisha had then stood up and proceeded to his house. So we find that the Prophet wouldn't even accept an invitation of food for when someone offered the Prophet, except if it was including Aisha anha. This is Sahih Muslim 2037. We find another virtue of Sayyidina Aisha anha where she actually feeds a beggar. Riyadus Salihin 356. So yeah, she feeds a beggar. That's another virtue. We find Aisha anha was the nurse of the Prophet. So when the Prophet became very severe, his illness, he would repeatedly ask, "Where will I be tomorrow?" The wives of the Prophet understood from this that he was hinting that he would like to be in the house of Sayyidina Aisha anha. So even during the end of the life, he was asking where will I be tomorrow, and the wives understood that he meant to stay in the house of the Prophet. This you can find in Bukhari 4450, 3774, 4435, 4449. So these are all the references from Sahih Bukhari. We also have another narration when the Prophet would be afflicted by illness. He would do like he used to read, and then he used to blow upon himself after reading it. But when he was severely ill in his final illness, Aisha anha says that I would do the blowing on his hands and then wipe over his body. So she used to do ruqya for him. This is Bukhari 5735. We also find the Prophet was resting upon Sayyidina Aisha anha when Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr entered with a miswak in his hand. So the Prophet was resting upon Aisha, and then a man, he came in, and he had a miswak. He was doing miswak. Then the Prophet began looking at the miswak, and then Aisha anha saw that he basically wanted that, or he loved that, loved using it. So she asked the guy to give the miswak, and then she softened it for the Prophet, and then she gave the miswak to the Prophet. So this is even like during the last moments, right? She softened this miswak for him because she knew that he loves it, and then she gave the Prophet. And so that's one of the verses she mentions, is that the Prophet left. When the Prophet left the world, he had the saliva of the Prophet. He had the saliva of Aisha in his mouth. So she counts this as a virtue for herself because she moistened the miswak for him. So from this, what we acknowledge is that, or what we can see is that she has immense love for him. He himself also had immense love for her, and We can find this from multiple narrations that I've cited thus far. We also find the Prophet is buried in the house of Aisha. You can see this in Tirmidhi 1018, Ahmad, Muslim Ahmad, Hadith 27. And the Prophet actually knew he would die there. You can find Bukhari 466, where he talks about, in this narration, let's see what he talks about. So yeah, in this narration, this is one of the last khutbahs in Bukhari 466, and he talks about like him leaving the world. So he dies in the house of Sayyidina Aisha anha. We also find a person actually spoke ill of Sayyidina Aisha anha in the presence of Ammar radiallahu anhu. And Ammar radiallahu anhu, he responded, he's another companion, he responded, "Get away, O scum, are you insulting the beloved of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?" And this is Tirmidhi 3888. Abu Musa radiallahu anhu, he said, "We were the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We did not ask Aisha regarding any hadith that we found except we found difficult, except that she had some knowledge regarding it." So they're saying, even the other companions saying that whenever we asked, that was something that we found difficult, Aisha anha had knowledge regarding it. So this shows the immense levels that she was at. Tirmidhi 3883. We also find narrated Al-Qasim bin Muhammad. Once Aisha anha became sick and Ibn Abbas went to see her and said, "O mother of the believers, you are leaving for truthful foreigners," i.e. the Prophet and Abu Bakr. Bukhari 3771. So this is very interesting. The other companions know that she is destined for paradise. So we're on point 33. I believe, let's see how many points are left about her virtues. I think another 10 probably are left. Okay, so we find another narration, Tirmidhi 3880. Jibreel came to the Prophet with her image upon a piece of green silk cloth, and he said, "This is your wife in this world and in the hereafter." We find another narration where it says, after the death of Sayyidina Khadija radiallahu anha, let me actually read this narration carefully. Alright, so yeah, after the death of Sayyidina Khadija, it was revealed to the Prophet that he was going to marry Aisha. And when the Prophet visited this family, this lucky family, he said to Roman, who was the mother of Aisha, he said to her, "I advise you to take care of Aisha and treat her well." Roman was a clever person. She guessed that there was definitely some wisdom behind this advice of the Prophet. She started to take care of Aisha more. Once the Prophet saw Aisha crying, this crying affected the Prophet. He approached her, asked her why she was crying. She said she was crying because of her mother. The Prophet turned to Roman and said, "Did I not tell you to treat Aisha well?" Roman felt embarrassed and promised that she would not treat Aisha harshly again. So what we notice from this narration, that the Prophet even told her mother to treat her well, and he could not allow her to be crying. He didn't want her to be crying and on to such a degree, like even her mother was told to treat her well. So what about us? What about the general public? If her own mother was told to treat her well. So I think the last point, pretty much, I'm going to mention, and then I'll welcome any Q&As, any questions. So we find Sahaba narrating from her. And I want to mention some of these Sahaba who actually praise her. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he mentions praise regarding her. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he mentions praise. Salama ibn Abbas. We find Ammar bin Yasir, Usaid ibn Hudayr. We also find Hassan ibn Thabit, Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Then we have general scholars that came after they had the praise. So there's many of them. So no point mentioning their names. So I believe I've covered all of the rest of the virtues that I was going to mention. And let me see if there's anything else. I think one more thing I wanted to cover was that she's part of the Ahlul Bayt. So unfortunately, there's a misconception that the wives are not part of the Ahlul Bayt. And I just wanted to highlight that she is actually part of the Ahlul Bayt family of the Prophet. And just give me a second, let me just find the reference for this. Alright, so we have a reference from Imam al-Dhahabi's book. He mentions that Ibn Abbas who said, "Allah intends only to remove from you impurity or people of the Prophet's household." He said it was revealed especially about the wives of the Prophet. And Isnad is Hassan. It's a reliable Isnad. What I'll do is I'll attach that because it's a bit difficult to find that one. So I'll attach the references. Just give me a second, I'm just going to get the reference and attach it. Yeah, found it. Almost. Yep, there you go. So I'll attach this reference. It's in Arabic. So if you can read it. So if you look on top right now, you will see it. So, yep. Imam al-Dhahabi mentions in his report that wives are part of the Ahlul Bayt. And chapter 33, verse 30 was actually revealed about the wives in particular. So we also find in the Quran, Ibrahim Islam's wives are included in the Ahl Bayt in chapter 11, verse 73. We also have a narration from Ibn Asakir. I've got reference for all of these. If anyone wants them, they can just mention it to me. It's like the link as the previous link that I mentioned. So what we find in Ibn Asakir's narration from Salama, it mentions that Salama said, "What about us?" Because she's the wife, right? She said, "And I, Messenger of Allah, am I included amongst them? Those who are like in the Ahlul Bayt, part of the people who were cloaked." The hadith of Kisa. She said, "What about I? And I, Messenger of Allah?" And he said, "You and you." So it's a Hasan hadith by Ibn Asakir. We also find a narration where he says, "You are part of my family." Another narration which says that. So yeah, there's plenty of narrations just to say that, look, the wives are part of Ahlul Bayt. There's many narrations. You can see Sahih Muslim 2408. And yeah, many narrations. So we'll end here. And Bilal, if you have any questions, you can come up if you like. Do you have any question? If not, we'll end soon. Let's end with the nasheed actually, about Sayyidina Aisha and her. عرض النفاق لعرض أم المؤمنين وهي البريئة ربة العرض الحصين. عرض النفاق لعرض أم المؤمنين وهي البريئة ربة العرض الحصين. أخذ النفاق بخسة ودناءة يرمي الحصان بذلك الإفك المبين. أو مثل تلك تلاك طهرة عرضها وينال منها سهم كيد المرجفين. أماه يا أماه لا تحزني عرضي وعرض أبي وكل الأقربين. أماه يا أماه لا تحزني عرضي وعرض أبي وكل الأقربين. جعلت فداك فأنت عنوان التقى والطهر والإيمان والعقل الرزين. ولقد رماك المرجفون بفرية تنبيك عن غدر وعن حقد دفين. آدم رسول الله ماذا بعدها فليبشروا بالذل والخزي المهين. آدم رسول الله ماذا بعدها فليبشروا بالذل والخزي المهين. الله كذبهم وأبطل كيدهم هذا جزاء الظالمين المعتدين. في سورة النور التي فضحتهم ببراءة نزلت لأم المؤمنين. إن جاءكم متطول بإشاعة فتبينوا يا إخوتي حق اليقين. إن جاءكم متطول بإشاعة فتبينوا يا إخوتي حق اليقين. إن جاءكم متطول بإشاعة فتبينوا يا إخوتي حق اليقين. So we'll end here. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.